Hi everyone. So this is a third video on the if, COUNTIF and SUMIF functions where we are going to look at another application that we can use these functions to help us out with. So here we have a carnival band where we have a registration fee and we have different sections and the cost of the costumes in these sections are also different. We would like to find out the number of persons registered for each section, the total payment we expect to collect for each section, and how much payment was actually collected. Here we have the registration section where we have the names of the persons, their ages, gender, and the section that they've registered for. So one of the first things that we can do is fill out this section here. Firstly, how do we calculate the amount of money that is owed? We see that there's a registration fee plus the cost of the costume. Now, the cost of the costume depends on the section. So we definitely need some form of checking that condition of which section the person is in. So we are going to use the if function to firstly find out what costume cost will be allocated to each person depending on the section of the band that they are in. So equal sign if. So for this first person, if their section represented by the cell reference E13 is equal to this first section here, then the cost of their costume is going to be $4,000, which is in cell C7. If they are not in this first section, the gigabytes, they can be either in the quad core or the absolute references. There are two possible sections that they can be in at this point. So it's not just a matter of saying, well, if they are in the gigabytes, then the cost of their costume is $4,000, else it's some other cost. We have to actually check to see whether or not they are in the quad core or the absolute references. So for the third argument here, the value if false, I'm actually going to put in another if function that is going to check this condition. So if E13, the section that the person has registered for, is equal to the second section here, the quad core, then the cost of their costume is going to be $5,000, which is in C8. At this point, we want to figure out now what do we put for the value if false. For the first if, I checked firstly if they were in the gigabytes, that's B7, then the cost of their costume is $4,000. If they were in the quad core in B8, then the cost of their costume is $5,000, which is in C8. Now, if they are not in the gigabytes and they are not in the quad core, it must mean they are in the absolute references, in which case the cost of their costume will be referenced in the cell C9. So we now have to close off two brackets that we opened. That first bracket is for the second if function, and then another bracket here to close off the first if function. So when I hit enter, I see that this first person who is in the gigabytes will pay $4,000 for their costume. Now, I really want to be able to copy this particular formula down to the other persons registered. However, I need to check to see if I have to use any absolute references. So let's see. If E13 is equal to B7, do I need any of these references to remain the same when I copy the formula down? And do I need any of these references to change when I copy the formula down? Well, I would like the E13 to be able to change to E14, E15, etc. However, I do not want the B7 to change. So I'm going to use $B, $7. Here now, the value, if true, if the person is in the gigabytes, the cost of their costume is going to be $4,000, which is in C7. I don't want that to change either. It's always going to be $4,000 if they're in the gigabytes. So I'm going to use the absolute cell referencing here as well. So let's see this comparison. If E13 is equal to B8, I want the E13 to be able to change to E14, E15, etc. I do not want the B8 to change. So I'm going to use absolute referencing for the B8 as well as C8 and C9. So when I copy the cell down now, this formula here, I will see the money owed by each person for their costume. So let's investigate. This person is in the quad core, and notice how all of the references remain in this area to make the comparisons and to actually get the cost of the costume correctly. So let's look at another person. This person is in the absolute references, and again notice all of the references remain in this area where I have to make my comparisons and be able to also retrieve the cost of the costume to put it into this column here. Now this is only referring to the cost of the costume. I also have to add in the registration fee, which is in cell C4. So I'm simply going to add on, that's reference C4 here. And again, I do not want this C4 reference to change because this is where I have my registration fee. So I'm going to use absolute referencing. So now instead of 4,000, this person owes 4,200. So when I copy this formula down, you will notice that $200 was added to all of these values. Now this is the money that was owed. Persons now can make different sorts of payments. So here I'm just going to put in a set of values so that we can sort of see how the spreadsheet works. So these are the payments that were made. So the balance of their payments now is going to be what they owe, subtract the payment that was made. So this here will represent the money that is owed. So by the way, since we are dealing with currency, we really should format these cells. So let's see, I'm going to select the currency format as well as here for the cost of the costume, currency format, and the registration fee. Great. So now we can work on this section of the spreadsheet here, where we want to find out the number of persons registered in each section, the total payment expected in each section, and the total payment collected. So for the number of persons registered in each section, I will need to count how many people are in the gigabytes, the quad core, and the absolute references. So I'm going to use equal count if this range here satisfies this criteria. Remember, I'm in cell E7, so I'm actually counting the number of persons in the gigabytes. So I'm going to select the gigabytes And let's see, we have 2 persons who have been registered for the gigabytes. Now, I would like to copy this formula down, meaning the reference B7 here should change to B8 for the quad core and B9 for the absolute references. However, I do not want the range E13 to E19 to change because this range E13 to E19 actually contain the registration data that I'm looking into to count out the number of persons in each section. So I'm going to use absolute references for the range of cells in this function. So when I copy it down now, I can see for the quad core that I'm looking into the registration data. I'm looking here to see if any of these values equal B8, which is the quad core, and there are 3%. And for the absolute references, I'm looking into the registration data to compare it to this value in B9, the absolute references, and I see that there are 2% registered. For total payment expected, I'm actually going to have to add up all of the costs owed. So I can use equal sign sum if this range here, the criteria being the gigabytes, I'm going to add up the values in the money owed column. So that's $8,400. So notice that it's not just a matter of multiplying the cost of the costume with the number of persons registered. I also have to add in the registration fee multiplied by the number of persons registered and so on. So I might as well just, use this registration data here with the money owed. So I'm going to do the same for the quad core and the absolute references.